talk with your caucus about the expectations about movement of bills, because that's where I went wrong. And people didn't talk to me about it. They were talking about me about it. And there was this whole stink saying that I was just sitting on bills. I said, what are you talking about? I am trying to move policy, but when you can't get legal, you can't get drafts, you can't get testimony on the phone.
Tell me the truth. Did you ever blame me?
No.
You didn't?
No.
Okay.
Actually, wait, I take that back. But my members also hopped on that bandwagon with you. And I'm like, what part of we're moving this
I remember that
because
day.
that was like the 9th hearing. So they're all telling me, you've got to move this. And I'm like, I'm trying. You have to help me move it.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. And today, our guest is the outgoing chair of the House Judiciary Committee, Sarah Vance of Homer. This is normally where I would give a bio of the guest that we're about to hear from. It's more important, though, to give context about this interview. For those of you who do not follow state politics closely, you need to understand just how shocking it is that Sarah Vance is on my show. With the departure of David Eastman from the House, she is arguably Alaska's most conservative legislator. I am on the opposite end of the political spectrum from her, but not just that. In public and in private, I often spoke of Sarah Vance as my enemy. We were in battle for the last 2 years, as far as I was concerned. And with that context, some of you may question why I'm not pushing back on her today. What I tried to do my best in this interview was to listen to understand, not to speak to convince. And for the record, there were no preconditions to this interview. We were scheduled for an hour. We went way over. She answered every single question, and she gives what I believe is an important window into who she is.
Sarah Vance, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here.
Where did you grow up? Where were you born?
I was born in Texas and grew up there until I was 10. My family.
You grew up in northern Texas?
Yes, up in the Panhandle of Oklahoma. There, North Panhandle, Texas, and then our church and school was in Guyman. We ended up moving there probably when I was 5, but it's all the same community. And then moved to Alaska when I was 10. It was my parents' dream ever since I was born. So it was something that we had planned and talked about my entire life up till the point that we could move. So when I was 10, it was a huge marker in my life because it was a dream achieved.
Were your parents Texans?
Yes. Yes. Deep Texans. I actually have Texas Rangers in both sides of my family. So we are deeply grounded in justice. And that's also a passion of mine and something that I learned about my family of why it's so important. But recognizing that the Texas Rangers also would take justice into their own hands. And that was not always the best idea. And so just learning the balance of what justice is, what it should look like, and how to execute it within our society and our government is something that I've been weighing heavily on.
And did you have siblings growing up?
I have 2 older brothers.
And so your parents and the 3 kids moved to Homer?
Yes.
When you were 10?
Yes.
How did they pick Homer?
I don't know. My dad came up early with our pastors, and they just were looking all over the state. And my dad just said, hey, we're supposed to be in Homer. It was just something that he just knew, hey, that's where we're supposed to be.
And when he came up with the pastors, was like a church moving to Homer, or was it just your family?
There were people that were going to plant a church in Alaska, and people came in the early 80s, and my dad was supposed to be a pastor and to take over the church. However, when we moved here, people had a very different plan. And so that never happened.
So he never took over the church?
He never took over the church. We had a lot of learning going on at that time. And so my dad was a welder by trade and got a job working on fishing boats, actually, and worked at the boatyard and worked on boats down in the harbor. He ended up later, when I was in junior high, going and working in remote villages across Alaska. So he's worked in almost every region of the state. And a lot of my heart for our rural communities and Alaska Natives comes from my dad and his reach just doing a lot of work, putting in fuel upgrade systems, water sewer treatment plants in villages that didn't even have running water during that time. And just the lessons that he learned and learning about the people and culture. And I've had him there in the legislature introducing him. And I cry every time because he told me that every voice has value. And regardless of whether we agree with it or not, there's going to be truth and richness to it. And it's my dad's experiences working in the rural parts of Alaska that have helped shape my heart and perspective that I'm still learning and growing on from my dad working in those places.
So were you like in 4th grade when you moved, or going into 5th grade, or somewhere around there?
Probably. I was homeschooled.
You were homeschooled in Texas and in Alaska?
I went to Christian school and homeschool in Oklahoma and Texas. And then I was homeschooled until 8th grade there in Homer. And then I went to the Homer Junior High. It's now called middle school. It was junior high at the time. And I graduated from Homer High School. I wasn't planning on going to college. For some reason, I made up my mind that that's not what I wanted to do. But on my birthday in August, my mom took me down to KPC there in Homer and said, you're going to take college classes. If you want to have a business, be a smart wife and mother, you need to understand business and how the world works. And I said, okay, then you're going to take these accounting classes with me. And so I signed my mom up too. I said, you know what? Two can play this game. And it was really a great thing that she had me do that, because I ended up doing business and accounting. And later I went to Bible college in Denver, and that's where I met my husband. And
how old were you when you went to Bible college in Denver?
19, I believe.
Oh, okay.
To back up, before I went to college, I did mission work. I went to Africa for 2 months.
Where'd you go in Africa?
South Africa, Namibia, and Swaziland, and was in some of the poorest places in the world. That's where I first came across young boys who were rescued from the streets. And that's when I first learned about trafficking and exploitation. And in the trafficking crime bill that we worked on in Judiciary, when I was just at this stuck place with a bill with the language that was tangled up with the prostitution statutes, it was those times in my mission work that I reflected on that said, wait a minute, there are people who are trying to survive, and prostitution is how they...
How old were you when you did the mission to Africa?
17.
Oh, okay. So like your senior year, or right after your senior year?
It was after my senior year.
Gotcha. And what church do you belong to in Homer? Like, you guys were part of a church in Texas, came up with the pastors. There was this agreement that your dad would take over, but it was an existing church or starting a new church?
They were starting a new church.
Okay.
It's no longer in existence.
Okay.
And so it's non-denominational. It was just one of those crazy things where, talk about politics. Church politics are nasty. And we didn't expect it. But I tell you, we grew so much because we aren't into keeping religion and things like that going. It's not about that. It's about relationship with the Lord and relationship with people in the communities, right? And we ended up leaving that church because it wasn't supportive, if it wasn't life-giving, and that's not what we wanted to be a part of. A lot of growth, a lot of good things early on, but it just didn't go in the direction, and the church ended up dissolving. And
found another church.
Yes. We ended up going to Glacier View Baptist Church there in town for a while, and I had my youth group there, and they're still doing great. And
was the mission through them?
No, I did the mission through Teen Mania, and that was based out of Texas. They took young people ages 12 on up all over the world. They had base camps. They had relationships with different organizations around the world, and so it was a very safe, larger structure. Teams of about 25 students at a time, would go into different places. So it was something that my parents felt comfortable. My mom was freaking out that I was going to Africa, but it was a wonderful experience because it gave me an interface with people who were greatly disadvantaged. It was the poorest township in that hemisphere. And then people who had never even heard of the name of Jesus. And just going beyond myself. So I knew that was something that I wanted to continue to do. So after that, I didn't do any mission work for a year. I tried to go to China and India, and my mom freaked out and said no. And I was like, you're taking the very breath from me. And I ended up going to the Philippines after that. That was a short term. That was before I was in Bible college. And then through Bible college, I ended up going to several different other countries, short-term missions, but it gave me a kind of a global perspective about people and persecution and hardships, and ended up getting married when I was 23.
So you met your husband in Bible college. Is there a story there?
The joke was that a lot of girls would go to Bible college to find a husband. And I'm like, that is absolutely not why I'm here. Totally not on my agenda. I'm here to learn and grow because I wanted to be a missionary. I wanted to do more work like that.
Because you were really profoundly influenced by that Africa trip. Or was that always something that you wanted to do?
It was always something that I wanted to do. I grew up as a little girl. I wanted to be a mama and do great things for Jesus. Simple as that. Not
from as long as you can remember.
As long as I can remember. Nothing complicated. I just, my heart for Alaska, we had planned as a family to go into remote villages. And then when I graduated high school, it was my oldest brother who said, hey, she needs to go do a mission. She needs to get out of here, go beyond herself and see how
the rest of the world
rest of the world is. And he was the one that encouraged my parents to
let you go,
to let me go. And ironically, the next trip that I went to was the Philippines. And he was the one who pitched a fit because the jihad at that time had captured 21 American hostages and were beheading and stuff in the southern part of the Philippines. And he's, no, you're not going. And I said, hey, I appreciate your insight and your support. However, I feel at peace about this and I'm going. And so I stood up to my big brother at that time and I went. It was something that I knew I'd always wanted to do, but I'm finding out mission work is not for everyone. And I'm okay with that.
When you did Africa and the Philippines and the other countries, I don't really know how that works. Do you go and meet with random people on the street? Or do you going door to door? Like, how do you find people to talk to about Jesus?
So it just depends on the ministry and the purpose, right? And it depends on the contacts that you have and really what they do. So my ministry in Africa, the way that they utilize teenagers is through drama. We had to learn street dramas that we would go perform in a town square or at schools that would tell a story because it can communicate from one culture to another easily.
Without necessarily the language.
Correct. We work with interpreters.
So you were like an actress.
Oh, I was terrible at that. I was so bad. They tried to have me do the pieces of the drama that girls are typically enrolled in. And I remember when they were trying to teach us some of the moves, they're like, oh, don't you know ball and chain? Because they were cheerleaders or dancers. And I said, no, I don't. So they put me with the guys in the fight scene because I just couldn't click with the girls and all the cheerleader type moves. That was clearly not me. So we did a lot of that where we would do the drama on the side of the road because it would tell the story of Christ. It would tell a story that's relational to what people are dealing with.
And it would be just the crowd would just gather spontaneously, like whoever was on the street would just gather and watch. It wasn't handing out flyers and saying, we're going to be here at this time.
No, in the Philippines, that's what we did. Because the jihad was active, we only had that afternoon to go into a neighborhood and hand out flyers and say, hey, come and invite. And a lot of times we would want to take food and water and just, hey, we want to give this to you. We want to be a blessing to you. And then present the message of the gospel. I went to Poland on a prayer trip. It was where we were going and praying with different churches and pastors and just loving on them and saying, we want to be here for you. So it was a very different purpose. I've been in Mexico where we did painting. We painted a Bible college there. They were trying to build a new one because pastors needed equipped and trained. And we just did a lot of cleaning and painting. I've been in Russia where an orphanage was just bought. It was very old and dirty. So we literally had buckets of water because there were very few cleaning supplies, and we were washing walls and windows. I've done a variety of different work. So it just is what's the need at the time and what can we do based upon the situation that we're in.
I can understand in Africa, you talked about some of the people had never even heard the name Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so they were completely like, this is all brand new. But in like Poland or Mexico or countries that Catholic countries, they've definitely heard the name Jesus.
Yes.
So it seems like the mission would be different. Is it because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that like the Bible church would be a more literal interpretation of the Bible, more focused on the word itself, whereas some of these more traditional old school Catholic countries, it's much more about ritual and not so much about the book. Is it about witnessing to people who maybe consider themselves to be Christians, but just aren't involved in the same way with the Bible, the way the Bible church is?
In every mission and every trip that I've gone on, it's built around the relationship with the people who were there in the country. It's based upon their need and respecting what it is that the work that they're doing and the message that they're bringing. I never went with a particular church over and over again.
You said in Mexico they were setting up a Bible church. So that would have been a different...
So there was a Bible school there that was going to help train the local pastors who were building churches. And really people would come from rural parts and come there to get more training because they were new pastors, right? So they were just going to teach them Bible and whatever. I didn't even get into the details of that. It was just, hey, we need help with this building. We also went out and shared our testimony about how we came to know Christ in some small churches. I went into Boys Town in Nuevo Laredo, and that was eye-opening experience because there was a facility that they referred to as Boys Town that was the legal place of prostitution. Everywhere else in town was not. And there would be family members that would drop off their loved ones, whether it's a grandma or a young girl, to make money for the family. And I just remember thinking, how in the world could a family member do this? And so we did some drama there and then just talked to people and loved on them. And I remember seeing people looking down on our drama from windows. They had customers up there and they stopped their appointment to watch. And I remember a transvestite prostitute coming and talking to us. And you just love them where they're at. There was no particular agenda other than Jesus loves you, he cares about you, and we handed out Bibles. Mm-hmm. Just a variety of work. It's that, hey, I believe the truth of the gospel is real. And I've seen a lot of people receive healing, incredible miracles, because the message delivers people from where they're at. And it's just really why I would keep going, because people just need help. It wasn't about any particular church dogma. It's wherever there was an opportunity and I had a piece about going with that particular group and it felt right, I would go. The Baptist Church in Homer has supported for years a missionary in China. And the church was putting together a mission to go and help him. He has orphanages there in China, and I'd always wanted to go. And I was getting all prepared, and there was just something that just didn't feel right. And my parents were like, I don't feel right about this. And I'm like, man, I want to go to China so bad. And then we go, no, we're going to cancel. We're just not going to do it. And then it wasn't long after that we got reports. This particular missionary had been arrested. And the whole mission just collapsed. And it was like, okay.
Why was he arrested?
Because of his mission work, he would get arrested on
because it's China.
It was China on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And he's been released. Mm-hmm. Incredible missionary. He speaks Mandarin fluently, which was always very impressive to the Chinese authorities. But it just showed, man, I wanted to go to China so bad. But the timing wasn't right. And I still haven't made it to China, but you never know. I have a heart to to share the truth and love of Jesus with people, because I see that life improves. And it's also given me a perspective about the real needs of people. Just like what I was talking about in Judiciary, with realizing that people have been put in place of prostitution just to survive. And that when it came down to what we should do with our law, separating that from human trafficking was an act of mercy. Yes, it's illegal, but it's a low-level crime because that person may not be there by choice. And we want to go after the trafficker. And so by separating that out, it was my experiences in the mission field that said, wait a minute, let's extend mercy to these people, help them where they're at. And I think about how if I hadn't had those experiences, how I might have handled that area of law very differently. So, a lot of people may not like the fact that I make my Christian life very front and center. It may make them uncomfortable, but I just want to highlight that it's really enriched my perspective about people and the needs of people, and I'm still growing in that.
So we were at Bible college in Denver. You had said that some women go to find a husband. That is not why you went.
No.
You went to learn, but you did meet your husband there.
I did. And he was of the same perspective. He wasn't even remotely interested. In fact, we fought terribly in Bible college. We both became leaders, and he was in charge of getting supplies for the women's dorms, and I was the RA over the women. He is the RA over the men. He was in charge of giving supplies, and I had to go through him to even get toilet paper restocked. And every time I would make a request, he would deny me and just make it difficult. And I was like, what is the problem? And finally, we took a class, a personality and gifts assessment class, where I learned about different personalities and how to communicate. And I'm like, okay, I am going to figure this guy out. And I typed out like an official memo request of what we needed. It looked very corporate. And he was sitting in the kitchen doing work. And so I put the piece of paper on the table and I slid it in front of him and I backed away. I didn't say a word because I knew if I spoke that it would ruin everything. So he reads it. He doesn't even look at me. And he flicks the paper across the table. He goes, I know what you're trying to do. And I had the supplies the next day.
So you figured it out.
I figured it out. Obviously, I figured it out really well because we got married after we graduated Bible college. We've been married for 21 years, have 4 children. He's amazing. He's a husband that I don't deserve. He is definitely the balance to me. He's the calm to my storm.
Where was he from originally?
Illinois.
Oh, but he was obviously open to moving to Alaska. Or was that a non-negotiable from you?
We lived in Denver, and we loved Denver, but they were having drought and water wars. And we were like, we want to raise our kids in a smaller area. But that was one of the questions that I asked him when we were talking about marriage. I said, the story about the fish and the bird who fall in love, where will they live? Because that's how I felt. And we decided that maybe we should live in between where the crow flies. So we looked at Idaho. That would be geographically in between Alaska and Illinois because our families were important to us. So that was our plan. But originally we did plan to go into the mission field. In fact, we had friends who were in the Ukraine, and we were planning when we first got married to go. And we ended up getting pregnant right away. Total surprise because I had a 2-year plan. And to at least,
not start one right away.
Not start right away. And we figured out in a hurry that we were not prepared to move overseas and have a baby and all of that. So we moved to Alaska because my parents were here and my daughter would be their first grandchild. And so we lived here for not quite a year. My husband drove pizza delivery and
did you live at home with your parents?
We did. It was awful. I mean, it was great, but it was awful at the same time. But housing is so hard, and finding a job was just terrible. And so we moved back to Illinois and lived.
This is like the early 2000s, I assume. Yeah.
Yes. We moved back to where my husband's family is in Illinois, and we lived on the family farm. in what was originally the Vance schoolhouse. And lived there, ended up buying a house in town and lived there for 6 years. And then we moved back here after my second daughter was born. So we've been back for about 14 years or so. But during that time that I lived in Illinois, I would come home for about 6 weeks at a time, twice a year. I was always very deeply connected. So it almost felt like I didn't leave. But yeah, living with my parents was definitely a challenge, but it highlights the need to have
Help.
Affordable housing, just a place to live for starting families. And my husband took a job with a bank, and it was really tight and really hard. But living here, this is home. And I always felt like a fish out of water outside of Alaska. This is my home. This is my heart.
So you've been back in Homer for 14 years now?
We moved back on Valentine's Day, 2010.
And so you had 2 more kids then in Homer?
Yes, 2 boys.
And your husband was working at a bank and y'all were just having a nuclear family. You had 4 kids at home. I'm just saying, because things are different now.
They're very
and so I tried to
Yes.
paint the picture of what was and then what happened that led to you being a legislator.
I know, we've been all over the place. Yes, I was
Stay-at-home mom, little kids.
Mom, 4 children, homeschooling, and just having...
The way you had been through 8th grade, because you had been homeschooled.
Actually, early on, my mom was heavily involved in our Christian school.
Oh, that's right, Christian school.
So even when I was homeschooled, she was super active in things. I never felt isolated. People talk about homeschoolers as if they're isolated and not a part of a community and things like that. That seems foreign to me because that was never the way that my family did it. Right now, my children, I have 2 that are involved in Civil Air Patrol, and my daughter dances. So she's involved in dance classes and Nutcracker, and they take music lessons. And we are looking at enrolling them in jujitsu. And my husband's going, how much can we put on the calendar? Because my mom, who has taken over homeschooling for us so that I can serve, she's like, they have book reports due. And, it's how can you fit it all in? So homeschooling gives us a lot of options. We're just as busy as people in the traditional brick and mortar. So it's whatever you make it out to be. And Alaska's super supportive of it. But no, I was homeschooling and just raising children, happily living life. And I don't know, I was designing knitting patterns. I worked at the local knit shop. Alaskan Yarn Co. Dyes her own yarn, and she's a brilliant artist. And I wanted some extra money to support my knitting habit. So I took a part-time job down there and dyed yarn with her. And that was a lot of fun. And so I started designing knitting patterns and could sell them on Ravelry, which is an online platform that has more than 1 million subscribers. You can get whatever knitting patterns on there. And it was my dream to continue to design because when I was in high school, I wanted to be a fashion designer. I love fashion history and people. And then I'm like, that's not very realistic for me. So
why wasn't it realistic for you?
I looked at the lifestyle, and I even looked at teaching fashion history and also designing historical pieces, because you look at fashion and you learn about people and cultures through clothes and fashion. And I thought that a lot of that culture is back east, and I don't know that's what I really want. I looked into it because I thought, okay, what could I do in fashion that would really be realistic and supportive? Because I don't know, did I want to be a big city? Probably not. I'm very practical. Getting into designing knitting patterns was something that I could do at home. It's a very creative outlet, and it was connected to my community. And so I ended up doing some knit-alongs and working with Alaskan Yarn Co. on the designs, the colorways and things like that. And so I did a few things, and it was so much fun. So that was my dream. I was like, I could do this, and it could provide just a little bit of income, creative outlet for me, still be at home with my children, and was happily doing that. And then a local issue popped up in my hometown. Someone sent me something through Messenger, And it was a resolution that was being passed by the city of Homer.
Yeah, the city council. So I think Wikipedia is right.
Yep.
Wikipedia said that you got involved because they were passing an inclusivity resolution. But per Wikipedia, you were part of a group of folks that thought that it was an attempt to declare Homer a sanctuary city.
The city council puts out their agenda packet on Thursday afternoons, and they have their meeting the next Monday. Over the weekend, this resolution that was included in their packet was to make Homer a sanctuary city. And it spread like wildfire. And people were saying, wait a minute. And it was not only just making Homer a sanctuary city, it was a very anti-Trump, unconstitutional. The way it was worded was just very inflammatory.
Because this was like 2017?
2017.
Yeah.
And it was just like, that's it. I got to say something. Because the concern about being able to take care of our own was very big. And public safety was very big at the time. Remember, we had SB 91. Crime was super rampant. Theft, property crimes. People were feeling very unsafe in the state. And I'm going, how in the world could we take more people in and provide safety? I'm all for legal immigration. But having a sanctuary city for illegals I said, it's hard enough to find a place to live and to be taken care of anyway, especially in Homer, right? And the resolution as it was submitted was extremely inflammatory. So
I just want to point out that it made national news that Homer was doing this. This American Life did a story about Homer, Alaska. They said that actually there weren't any illegal immigrants in Homer at the time. There was a city that was having an enormous debate and spending a lot of time on something when they actually didn't have any illegal immigrants that anyone knew of in Homer. So it was news.
Yes. And I remember when they came because they interviewed a lot of us and it was a whole big deal. But there were a group of us that met, about a dozen of us that met for lunch before the city council meeting, was trying to figure out, what are we going to say? We know we only have 3 minutes. Okay, you can say this and take turns so everything gets said. So we get to the council meeting that night, and there were like 200 other angry bubbas at the meeting that night. It was packed, and I don't know that it had ever been that full. People were angry about it. We get there, and the council had a different resolution and said, oh, no, we aren't wanting to make a sanctuary city. We just want to be a welcoming city. And I spoke, and I said, we can't unsee what you already put out there and think that it's nothing. And people remembered what I said. And we ended up doing a FOIA request and finding out that several of the council members were talking about making Homer sanctuary city. And so we felt lied to.
Was there, as far as you could see from the emails or from the FOIA request, was their goal to attract immigrants to Homer? Making a city a sanctuary city that doesn't have any undocumented workers in it feels performative. Unless they were like literally trying to attract undocumented workers from around the country to move there. But were they trying to do that? What did you learn about the motivation behind it?
That's what we were trying to figure out. We didn't know. But then we felt like, why would they lie to us? Why would they tell us, no, we're not doing that? And then we find out through their emails, yeah, they did want a sanctuary city. So when you have deception by your city, your government, then you don't know what is happening. We felt that was wrong, that the people who were supposed to represent us on the city level were not being honest with us. That's when we instituted a recall on behalf of the city council members. And I ended up becoming the face and the voice of that recall. I had no idea at the time that's what was going to happen. That was not my motivation for getting involved. And the council members ended up suing the city of Homer and saying, no, we shouldn't have a recall vote. ACLU of Alaska got involved.
To try to stop the recall?
To try to stop the recall. We won that lawsuit, and we were able to proceed with the recall vote. And in the end, we lost the recall. However, we did have an incredibly high voter turnout for a June special election. So we felt very successful in that because it was getting people informed and engaged about what was going on in their local government. And then I felt so compelled to stay engaged. People told me, please don't stop representing us. I had people that I visited in the hospital, tears running down their eyes saying, we can't fight anymore. Please don't stop representing us. And so I ran for city council that fall and got spanked. I lost so bad. But I was like, you know what? I'm supposed to be engaged. And
I'm sure you learned a lot.
Oh my goodness. I learned what not to do.
Mm-hmm. What were some things that you learned not to do?
I learned about being respectful to people serving and whether I agree with them or not, and how I approach them. Because I ended up at the end of the recall, after it was over, I came before the city council and I said, I'm going to speak to you as Heartbeat of Homer. That's what we called ourselves for the very last time. And I ended up asking for their forgiveness for not showing them respect and in the way that I approached them. I said, what I want is reconciliation. And no matter how much we disagree, you are there serving and you are there leading our city. And that itself deserves respect. And I said, I would like for us to start over because we are still going to be neighbors. And we're still going to be standing together in line at the post office during Christmas, hoping to get our packages out. We're going to be supporting our kids in Nutcracker, and our kids are going to be getting off the school bus. And we have to move forward together as a community. That was like a shockwave through the city because it was very unexpected. Because I came at them with such force for wanting accountability through the whole process of the recall. But I said, this is something that we can put behind us now and move forward together. I've taken that approach to the legislature that goes, okay, we can fight like cats and dogs. We're going to mess up. We're going to make mistakes. But let's remember the bigger picture here. We're Alaskans, and let's clean up the mess, pick up, and move on. And that's really hard. And there's still a lot of people, a lot of my supporters don't fully understand that.
I want to stick with this topic for just another moment about the sanctuary city issue because it's obviously back in the news now with Trump coming in and the promise of massive deportations. And I saw a tweet from you fairly recently in support of that. And I just, foreshadowing a potential early judiciary hearing, we have refugees in Alaska. They have a legal status and they have a lot of rights that are given to them because they have this federal status as being a refugee. And in the past 4 years during the Biden administration, Alaska brought in more refugees than we ever had before, which is about 500 a year. Most of them have been Afghans or Ukrainians. However, they don't have this official federal refugee status. They're called humanitarian parolees, which is an emergency temporary status. And so the fear from some of them is that that would be a very easy temporary status to terminate. And if we ended up sending 1,000 Ukrainians, for example, out of Alaska, it would actually cause harm to our economy because so many of them are doing important work in Alaska.
So when it comes to this topic, I support legal immigration. It's the ones who are here illegally that I think should be returned home. Public safety is my very first concern. That was my concern back in 2017. It's still my concern now, especially when you look at human trafficking. It's so bad. It's so bad with open borders, undocumented. People on the news have seen 350,000 kids who've come across the border that our government doesn't know where they're at. There's a lot of speculation that they have been trafficked. And that's heartbreaking. In Alaska, if we have people here who are here legally, they're in the process of getting their citizenship, then they should do that. America is built on that process, right? But if they're here illegally, then I don't think they should have the same rights. They, in fact, do not have the same legal rights as those who are going through the process.
My fear is that the folks being asked to leave would be these temporary humanitarian parolees, which, in other words, they are legal right now, but the president has the power to make them no longer legally allowed to be here with the stroke of a pen. And because in the first Trump administration, the number of refugees in Alaska, we normally received about 130 to 150 a year since about 2000. And then in the first Trump administration, because he lowered the total number of refugees allowed, so Alaska proportionally went down. So we were like 130, and then it was like 60. And the last year was 20. We only had 20 refugees. Part of that was COVID. But then the first year of the Biden administration, it went up to 500. It's like the refugee organizations were like, oh my God.
Yeah, what do you do, right?
But and part of that was because we pulled out of Afghanistan. There were whole planes of Afghan refugees that were like leaving the country. So you know what I'm saying? There was a lot of factors that came into that. But the bottom line is that I don't want the rhetoric. I think that Alaska has a different circumstance than a lot of the rest of the country on this issue.
Sure.
And so I don't want us to be harmed by something on the Texas-Mexico border. Do you know what I'm saying? That's
Yes. But one thing that I've been highlighting to people of the connection that we have to the Texas-Mexico border is human trafficking and the drugs. You know, we've seen fentanyl come into Alaska and kill. We had more than 254 fentanyl deaths last year, I think. And that is because of the open borders from Mexico and Texas, the drugs that are coming in. Where there's drug trafficking, there's human trafficking. And our Alaskan girls have been found in Mexico and in Texas, right? That is having a direct impact on our public safety and the health of Alaskans. And so that's why it's a concern of mine. But again, if they're here legally and they're going through the process and they're contributing, they're not the criminals. They're not the people bringing harm.
I'm just saying, like, unfortunately, those two particular groups, the Afghan refugees and the Ukrainian refugees, that particular community is like on pins and needles.
I bet.
I do want to go back. So now we'll move on to like how you ran for office. So you ran for city council.
Yes.
And that first time lost, but learned some valuable lessons.
Yes.
And then what happened?
I cried for 3 days when I lost.
I have to be honest, like I've only run for office twice now and I haven't lost. But I remember when I ran the first time, I was like, man, if I lose, I would never do this again because it was a terrible life experience.
People don't consider how humbling it is to just take a public beating, right? You really put yourself out there. And what the recall did is it pulled back the rug on the political division in Homer. It was really hard. And people felt very divided. And people blamed me for that. And I said, that's not my goal. My goal is to bring us together. But we can't ignore and disrespect each other's views on this. So I cried for 3 days, and a friend said, Sarah, you shouldn't be concerned because obviously God has someplace better for you. So I just said, okay, you're right. And I just began to pray over my community and just say, okay, I gave it my best shot. So now what? That summer, I got a phone call and was asked to run for State House. And I said, you're crazy. I can't do that. And I got a more serious phone call in December, and I turned him down. And I said, I'm humbled that you think I could represent at the state level, but my children are young, and I have so much to learn. And he said, I respect your decision. However, I think you're wrong. I hang up the phone, and my husband looks at me, and he says, Sarah, I think we can do this. And I thought, man, if my husband thinks we can do this, then I can do anything. Because having my family's support, rather than me saying, hey, this is what I want to do, what do you think? Having my family say, let's do this, was unexpected and a game changer. Because I was not aspiring to be in public office, but it was a matter of the people want representation. So we just started taking the first steps. I'd never been involved in the Republican Party. I even had to ask myself, do I want to run as a Republican? Because someone high up in authority, Tuckerman Babcock, he was the party chair at the time. And he said, Sarah, I'd like you to consider running as an independent because we don't know if Paul Seaton is going to continue to run as a Republican. And no one had been able to defeat him. And I went to him and I said, okay, what's my shot at winning? Like, I want to.
And at this point, this is pre-ranked choice voting, so winning the Republican primary.
Yes. And Paul Seaton had been serving for 16 years. He was the chair of House Finance.
Got it. So the theory is that you could run as an independent and then you could avoid the primary law.
Correct.
And then you could still be on the ballot.
Correct. And I went back and I read the party platform and I was registered as a Republican. Okay. But here's the perspective here. Before I got involved in the recall, I didn't even know the name of my mayor. That's how much I lived under my rock. I didn't follow the news. I didn't want that kind of negativity in my life. Why did I need to? I voted, but I wasn't a super informed voter. But what getting involved in the recall in the city showed me is that, man, I need to pay attention to what's going on. I need to learn. And so I didn't know that the Republican Party existed locally. Like, why should they? I thought that was for like leadership and big, foo-foo people. So I went to my first Republican district meeting and just was like, what's this all about? So I read the Republican Party platform and I thought, I agree to most of this stuff. There's a couple little nuances. And so I expressed that and I said, no, I'm going to run as a Republican because I don't want to portray myself as someone I'm not. I believe in our constitutional republic. That's why I'm a Republican. Not because of any one man, not because of the brand. I believe in the foundations of our country. And Tuckerman's like, okay. I just started taking the steps. I went to the first state GOP convention, having no idea what that was about, and just started going out in the community and talking and getting support. And they said, what's your platform? And I said, you determine my platform. You tell me what's important because I represent you. And they were flabbergasted. So that's how I came to the conclusion about what was important, what the priorities were. And repealing SB 91, the soft on crime bill, was huge. Defending the dividend and no state income tax. I think I overwhelmed everyone. They were completely flabbergasted that I won. And it just took off from there. So every 2 years, I ask the same question. Is this what I'm still supposed to be doing? And I go back to my district and I say, it's time to renew our 2-year contract. And you tell me what the priorities are. And so far, so good.
What did Tuckerman Babcock and the Republican Party, what were their issues with Paul Seaton?
Paul Seaton and others in the legislature, Gabrielle Ledoux, Louise Stutes, had formed the Muskox Coalition that had given the Democrats control. They gave them the majority. And that was highly controversial. And they said, you can't do this. And Tuckerman Babcock and John Faulkner were looking at what Republicans could do to defend the brand of the Republican Party and tried to pursue that legally. They tried to disallow them from running as Republicans because they said they're not supporting Republican majority, not supporting the platform. Highly controversial. I didn't even know any of that when I was asked to run. I wasn't angry about anyone. It was just, I had people in the community saying, I want you to represent us. We're not getting it from Paul Seaton. He was introducing a bill that would institute a state income tax and also cut the dividend to a 75-25 split, 75% going to government, 25% to the people. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. The people made it very clear that that's why they didn't support Paul Seaton anymore and said, we want true representation. And it's still a big topic in the Republican Party now, and ranked choice voting too, right? Is, okay, each party should be able to determine who gets to carry their brand. However, an individual gets to determine how they want to be registered. So it's a fine balance that we're still trying to work out, especially now with open primaries. Does the party get to determine who's going to carry the name and things like that? I find it interesting that topic has come full circle again, and Sanctuary City immigration has come full circle again.
I wonder, do you feel that because you defeated Paul Seaton in the primary in 2018?
Yes.
In 2018, that in some way locks you, that whereas...
Let me make a correction. Paul Seaton chose not to run as a Republican that year.
Oh.
He ran as a nonpartisan.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a big surprise. We didn't know what he was going to do. So
he ran anyway. You won the primary, and then he registered as nonpartisan and ran anyway.
So I was up against him in the general election.
Times. But it seems like you were rewarded by basically running against someone who had been a Republican for a long time, who had caucused with Democrats, that it would basically set you up like, this is why you won. So in a way, I think that it would restrict your freedom in terms of negotiations for being in, because we do it weird here in Alaska. Like, where just because you're a Republican or Democrat doesn't necessarily mean which caucus you're going to end up in. But it seems because of that start for you, we're not going to see Sarah, Vance, and 14 Democrats and a caucus. You know what I mean? That's not going to happen.
So when I was first elected, I came in saying I would never caucus with a Democrat. I had the mindset that I just couldn't do business with them, which was very naive on my part. Now, giving control to the Democrats, very different story, simply because we have a different worldview.
Between you and me, I don't feel like Democrats ever get control.
You're in control now.
Bryce Edgmond is not a Democrat. Louise Stutes is not a Democrat. I know.
So it's all political, no matter what, right? But what I've learned through serving is the alignment of the general worldview matters, right? You and I get along on a lot of issues. We have the same heart for a lot of issues, but we approach it from a very different perspective. And asking, hey, why don't you come and join the Republicans? And you're like, I don't think that'll work.
I wasn't going to bring this up. I famously sent you a text message that was intended for Sarah Hannon.
I know.
And that I would say it created a lot of drama that continues to this day.
Yeah.
For listeners who may not be following, I met with the other freshmen after our orientation in 2020. We had the largest freshman class in 2 decades, 17 of us. And we met at a bar. And we started mapping out what if the freshmen took over, half jokingly, but I think half serious. And we quickly made a leadership roster of chairs of every committee being led by freshmen. And I don't know if you remember what was on that, but we had Craig Johnson as Speaker of the House. And we had Sarah Hannon as Majority Leader. I was like, I'm just going to send this to Sarah real quick and see what she thinks. And I sent it to the wrong Sarah. I sent it to you, and your response, I will never forget it. Where am I in this leadership? And when you said that, I was at a table, lots of legislators around me, and I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And Will Stapp was across me. He's like, what? And I was like, I sent our plan to Sarah Vance. And then everyone started screaming, and Will Stapp was like, now we have to follow through.
I was sitting there. At first, I was like, wait, hold on. I'm not on here. And then I went, he sent this to the wrong Sarah. What should I do with this? And then it's like you have the 2 angels sitting on your shoulders, right?
Yeah.
One that's saying, you should send this to Suzanne Downing right now and to all of your members so that everybody knows what the plan is in a hurry. And then the angel on my shoulder said, Sarah, is this the way that you want to start a legislative working relationship with Andrew Gray? Do you want to be that jerk? Because that would absolutely break trust with every freshman member too, right? And so that's when I chose.
Yeah, but it didn't matter because Jesse Sumner sent it to Jeff Landfield. So
well, but I chose.
You chose the higher path.
That's why I responded back to you and said, I think you sent this to the wrong person,
I know.
Right?
Oh
and
my
you're
God.
like, oh my God.
Oh my God. It was
and
so humiliating.
I said, you know what? I think we're going to be the best of friends after this. We're going to surprise everybody.
So the funny thing is that I got the meanest, angriest phone calls Yeah, they were all from Democrats. Democrats were just like throwing themselves in front of moving vehicles. Like they were so angry at me and so upset and said I didn't understand anything.
Okay. We've all sent the wrong texts
yeah.
to someone that we're just like...
I think it's like human nature. If you're texting about somebody, there's just this like weird thing that you send it to that person. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's why I chose, no, I'm not going to be that jerk. Because having trust among colleagues, it doesn't matter what party you're in, right? It doesn't matter. The fact that we can trust each other to not be a jerk in that moment of vulnerability is huge, because that's what we have. We have our word and we have our integrity in office amongst each other. And I saw that was clearly, I didn't want to be that jerk, because that would have had a very lasting impression. And like you said, it's still looming. But for you, I didn't cast blame on you.
Mm.
It's how all of us handle how we're moving forward and how we're going to work together.
So I wanted to ask about the National Christian Legislators Organization that you're a part of and how you got involved with that. And what's the correct acronym?
NACL.
NACL.
Yeah.
So National
Association of Christian Lawmakers. I know. People love to hate this organization.
Oh, well, I was going to say that. Hey, I was curious because I know that Bob Ballinger, is that where you guys met?
Yes.
Through that organization?
Yes.
But how did you get involved in that organization?
What do you really want to know?
I think what I really want to know is how important is the organization and what's the organization's place in your political life?
I think it's highly important. So I got an email that was inviting me to their very first meeting in Florida. And they highlighted the speakers that they were going to have.
So it was a new organization.
It's a new organization. And that was in 2020, I believe. And they were going to talk about life when...
Who were the speakers?
Family.
Do you remember?
The one that I remember specifically was Janet Porter. And she crafted the very first heartbeat bill. And I'm thinking, man, why did they email me? How did I get an invitation to this? And the only thing that I could think of is because I introduced a heartbeat bill. I sponsored a heartbeat bill. And I thought that's got to be the only reason that they would know to reach out to me. And I thought, I want to learn more on this issue. And I just thought, I need to go. So I went, got there, and they were looking for state chairs. And I got to know the founder of the organization immediately, asked me if I wanted to be the Alaska state chair. I said, yes, I agree with what you're doing. And
was anyone else from Alaska with you?
No.
So then you were the state chair.
I was the state chair, just like that. And so they talked about what do we want to do? We're creating this organization, the first of its kind since the Continental Congress. And I talked about human trafficking as an issue. And I said, we need help in Alaska. I said, the rate of rape and sexual assault is the highest in the nation. I said, it's so bad. If we were cut our numbers in half, we're still number one. And trafficking is a big deal. And I need help. Our state needs help. And the leadership came back that next meeting and said, we want to create the Committee on Human Dignity specifically to help Sarah Vance, to highlight this issue, give tools that would help all the states. I was so humbled that people heard me and cared, because they created other committees, obviously, but said, okay, what is one that we could give a platform to highlight this issue? So I've stayed involved because of just continued support like that and prioritizing things. I told you about the App Store Accountability Act that I'm introducing this year. That was introduced at NACL to help safeguard our kids and getting the big tech companies to hold them accountable, have them a part of the conversation. Meta is now at the table. Meta came to NACL and talked to us and said, hey, we want to be a part of this.
Is Mike Johnson part of the organization?
We honored him with an award. So I
guess I'm talking about the U.S. Speaker of the House.
Yes, the U.S. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. I don't know if he's an official member, but we recognized him. So it's essentially an organization for lawmakers on various levels who support biblical foundations and want to move forward on family policy.
I guess one fear that some folks have is that it's an organization that wants to make America a Christian nation.
It is our perspective that we were originally a Christian nation and have veered from that and believe that we should be. Now, does that mean that we think that we are going to mandate that everyone become a Christian? No. We believe in our freedom of religion. That means we're going to respect everyone where they're at.
I guess where it would come up is if you had a great governor candidate who happened to be Muslim, would you not vote for them because they're Muslim?
I would not vote for someone if they don't share my same worldview and priorities. And there's people, like when I'm talking to people in my district and they ask about Democrats, for instance, I said, there's some really great Democrats that I work with who we align on policies better than some of my Republicans. And I'm willing to work with them on that. So it's the same for someone who has a different religion. Are you sharing the same worldview and priorities, and are you going to vote accordingly?
Gotcha. I guess to end, we can talk about Judiciary for a moment.
Okay.
You were chair of Judiciary for the last 2 years, and I would say that it was tense.
It was, but I think we both learned a lot.
Yes, I did learn a lot. Do you have any lessons that I should know?
I was reflecting on that recently going, man, I did not shine as a chair like I really wanted to. Being more patient with our legal services and administration. It was so frustrating that we would have a bill that we were trying to get.
And there was no
ready,
lawyer online?
And there was no lawyer online, or the Senate had taken up all the phone lines and we couldn't get anybody through. And that was absolutely frustrating because I had pressure on me to move legislation. And we had numerous hearings on bills, right? And we would be waiting and waiting for the new bill to come back. And it really delayed a lot. And hopefully now we have eased up some of the pressure on legal services. But were not fully staffed for a variety of reasons, and giving the grace to them and really the executive branch for people who needed to come before us. I'd want to get them on the phone immediately and have answers to my questions. Well, they're dealing with everybody else besides their duties, and having more time for my staff to get those in alignment. Mm. That was hard. Give grace to them in that process. Get the expectations from your caucus ahead of time. I didn't move my members' bills like they wanted me to. And I had planned the first month for us to have a lot of review of how it all worked because we had so many new members. Mm-hmm. That I didn't want us making policy decisions until we knew how to do it. That created animosity with my members that I wasn't moving legislation. Mm-hmm. And I said, look, Judiciary is not a light committee. We're making decisions about life and death. If people are going to be locked up away for the rest of their lives, there's all kinds of super big consequences that you can see directly versus some of the other committees. And I took that very seriously. So just having a conversation about that expectation ahead of time, I think will help you. Mm-hmm. And
that's really great advice.
And the relationship that you have with your members, because it's big.
I think a lot of, I don't know where you were, you guys didn't organize until, it was different 2 years ago. So you found out you were Judiciary chair the day after we started.
Yeah.
So you didn't really have time like me because I think about all the things that I want to do. But so far, it's all of the things that I want to do.
Right.
And not really thinking about all the things that I need to do to serve the rest of the body.
And communicating with you as members on the committee, I wanted to make that inclusive and important and to treat you all equally. Some of the things that I did different was I mixed up the majority and minority members across the table rather than the way it had been done in the past.
With the minority as far away as possible.
Correct. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want it to be that way. Mm-hmm. On the budget subcommittees, I made sure that the chairs that were brought in were all equal. Because as minority members, we had smaller chairs that sat lower than the others. and it was noticeable. Wow. And we were on the end, like we had a little table at the end, and it felt like we were not, like our vote wasn't equal. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to change that. I wanted to make sure that every legislator in every district was treated equally. And it's a hard balance, right? Because you're clearly the majority for a reason. You're going to give your members priority. But just in that dialogue, just in how we sit at the table is important. Mm-hmm. I also was reflecting on some great chairmen that I had who were Democrats when I was in the minority and thought,
who were some great chairmen that you had that were Democrats when you were in the minority?
I'm probably going to have Republicans be like, oh, I can't believe she said this. Jonathan Christ-Tompkins was the chair of state affairs, and he treated me well. He was very...
And you and I have a little bit of a thing here because Jonathan Christ-Tompkins told you that you could take some of his bills, and then I filed them without... So I was like, so there's actually some tension there because, and you know what? Who my tension with is with Jonathan Christ-Tompkins, because he actually called me. The whole ID bill, the prisoner ID bill, and all of that. He was like, I saved those for Sarah. And I was like...
Well, he had asked me way before you were elected. He had asked me when he left, hey, would you carry this bill? And I said, okay. So it wasn't that it was after the fact. It was just, he asked me way in advance. But you had a portion of the bill.
I took a portion of the bill. I didn't take the iPad part because I thought it was going to be too hard to pass.
So Jonathan was an easygoing chairman. He seemed very fair. He never shut me down in committee because I was that committee member like you who had a ton of questions. Mm-hmm. I want to know. Like, I really want to know. I'm not just trying to waste people's time. Right. I think good policy comes through great discussion and deliberation, and the importance of having that on the legislative record matters, especially in judiciary when things come before the courts. Mm-hmm. They will look back on what our intent is in the legislature and the conversations that we had. But I was there to learn and really develop things. And he was very accommodating and not overly so. He treated everyone fairly. And I could always go to him on fishery issues and collaborate. We rocked the boat in fisheries one year by introducing a CFPC bill that would remove one of the commissioners. And boy, did we get people's attention. Oh, man, we made people so mad. He just had a very respectful, easygoing way about him that I have remembered and honored. My personality is not that. Mm-hmm. I have to work hard at being accommodating instead of, I get laser focused, and I have to work at making sure that I'm communicating and keeping people engaged.
I will apologize to you for something. It's not what you're expecting. Maybe I'll cut all of this out, but...
At this point, I discussed a matter that I did decide to cut out, but I'm leaving in Sarah's advice to me.
You're going to want to cut it out.
Yeah.
You better pray about it. I'm not saying don't do it. It needs to be done. But timing and knowing that you have support with you. You cannot stand alone. You cannot stand alone. I know you always want to do the right thing, but there's also timing in things. As a chairman, you will be faced with situations that you're like, this shouldn't happen. And you want to call it out and you want to tell everybody. Mm-hmm. But then you have to ask, who else could be harmed? Mm-hmm. And that's no fun.
Yeah, I think I've had these grandiose plans. I think what I should probably plan for is the educational hearings about how the departments work.
Yeah, I did that.
Right? Yeah, you did. And actually, that's a good way to start because it is a soft start. You're meeting, you're getting to know your committee. People are interacting. They're learning how to do this.
Like I said, talk up with your caucus about the expectations about movement of bills. Mm-hmm. Because that's where I went wrong. And people didn't talk to me about it. They were talking about me about it. Mm-hmm. And there was this whole stink saying that I was just sitting on bills. I said, what are you talking about? I am trying to move policy, but when you can't get legal, you can't get drafts, you can't get testimony on the phone.
Tell me the truth. Did you ever blame me?
No.
You didn't?
No. Okay. Actually, wait, I take that back. I was trying to move the trafficking crime bill, I'm like, we are going to take up these amendments and we're going to move it out today. But my members also hopped on that bandwagon with you. And I'm like, what part of we're moving this
I remember that
because
day.
that was like the 9th hearing. So they're all telling me, you've got to move this. And I'm like, I'm trying. You have to help me move it. Because I was like, we made it too big. And that's the other thing that I learned is I was like, this is our one shot on the trafficking bill. And I made it too big. Alaska seems to not handle large bills. It's just hard to digest.
Oh, you hear about other states like doing like 1,000 bills, like these insane numbers. And I'm like, we can barely do 30.
Right? So I was thinking, oh, we got to beef it up because they'll want to strip something out. They didn't even take it up seriously in finance. They nitpicked areas. And there were areas that became distractions in that bill.
That's the danger with a big bill.
Right. So keep that in mind when you're like, man, I want to do this. What could be a distraction from the meat of the bill that you're really wanting? Then feel it out, right? That's where I went wrong. I was like, man, I'm gonna get bipartisan support. This is an issue that we did on most things, right? And the areas that we didn't, I should have just left them alone. Mm-hmm. And because something like that, it takes all of us. Mm-hmm. And it just became too much. And the bill dragged out, and there were other things that needed to be brought up.
Do you have a book to recommend to our listeners?
One of the first questions that I was asked when I was running at my forum, my very first forum with Paul Seaton, was, what's your favorite book? And that was like supposed to be a soft question.
Right, like an easy
thing. And I answered, I love the Bible and the Constitution. Like I learn something and I grow every time I read them. It's very fresh. And people thought that was the most controversial answer. They thought it was a political answer. And I'm like, I'm just being honest. Okay, I will be more specific. Read the book of Esther. I love that book. It is the only book in the Bible that's written in story form. And it's just such a harrowing story about people and someone unexpected coming into a position of influence and having the courage to speak up.
The Book of Esther. Sarah Vance, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@akleg.gov or call 907-465-4940.